let's get the show rolling. Welcome everybody. A question beforehand. Who is actually teaching here? Oh, that's great. That's great. Researching? Anything else in education? That's fine too. I'm one of those. I'm anything else in education. It's good to have titles here. Start out some about myself first. I'm Jan Tishauser. I developed a passion for educational research in 2009 and stumbled across this New Zealander, John Hattie. And I also stumbled across another New Zealander, and talk about him. I made, as far as I know, the first 360 feedback for teachers, anyway in Holland. Started that in 1998. And 3 years ago, the first research ed in the Netherlands was initiated by me, and I feel very lucky that I am still the program manager, so I can put all my personal interests into the program. So you're looking at my day here. Everything that I find interesting. Sometimes I Twitter a bit, at Jan Tishauser. And let's start off with this photograph. This photograph was taken in 1960 in a place called Morningside, Alberta, Canada. And at that time I was 6 years old and I was sitting on that pony. And in the same year, 1960, a young graduate student in New Zealand, Nuthall, started his research. So he started his research and I started elementary school. Some coincidence. And he's little known. He's known to researchers. He might be known a bit more in New Zealand. I don't know, never been there. There's a Graham Nuthall Trust there. And he's underestimated, I think. He did some very important, groundbreaking research, and he had a unique method of researching. And he actually developed that method while he still was a student, and he kept on doing it for 40 years, 40 plus years. So what I'm going to give you now is an historic overview of his research, his methods and his findings, and his obstacles, the outcomes, and the outcomes are quite important actually, quite important for how we teach and how we organize our teaching. So that ends with the recommendations he gives us. He wrote this little book. I had a hard time getting it until Amazon took it up, because you had to order it at the Ministry for Education in New Zealand. It used to be like that, but it seemed, I got it through Amazon after writing them about 10, 20 times. He wrote that book in great haste because he was terminally ill. He's one of those people that starts his golden years with his pension and thought, well, I'm going to write down stuff for teachers, I'm going to leave the research field and I'm going to utilize all my findings for teachers, and then he got terminally ill. He wrote this in 6 months, and the last chapter was actually written by his associates. So that's kind of sad. I wish he was here. He started out with something that must have looked like that. A simple tape recorder, a light bulb, and a microphone, and he attached those above students. And he sought out the experienced teachers. You have this preconception, if you want to see good teaching, go to the experienced teachers. It's not that strange, is it? And he was driven, he was, at that time, he wasn't really driven by, well, okay, we have some extra guests here. Please come in. Now, if the fire alarm goes, we're going to be in big trouble there. So, no smoking. He didn't have a really well thought through research question. He was curious what is really happening in the classroom, what is the experience of the learner, And maybe if I go to good teachers, I might discover something about good teaching and the effects on students. That was kind of a fake setup. But he did analyze the recordings he made and the observations they made. And his first finding was that on the surface, things happen spontaneously. A teacher like me now talks, and students respond, and if he asks them anything, they respond politely, and smile and nod. And it seems like it's just happening. But when analyzing the interactions, he found out that there's a ritual going on. There are set patterns of communication and social patterns in a classroom. And probably they're going on right now, those same patterns. So what happens in the classroom became more or less predictable to him. Well, he was out there in New Zealand, so he thought, well, let's look at some posts at interesting universities in the United States, in Japan, and maybe I can do some postdoc research there. And maybe I can see if I see the same rituals. Doesn't matter if you're in New Zealand, Japan, or the United States. Probably doesn't matter if you're in Sweden or in Holland. In a classroom, the same underlying rituals and the same patterns are quite clear. And then he took the next step. On basis of his first experience, he wanted to look a bit further. He wanted to cut out a lot of noise, a lot of the spontaneity actually. So he started working with scripted lessons. And the first series of lessons they scripted was about this bird, the black-backed seagull, I think. And they also used experimental design. He wanted to know, it doesn't matter if a teacher is trained or not trained, or better trained, or more experienced or less experienced. So they worked with three groups of teachers. Teacher trainees without any further instruction. They worked with teacher trainees who had been told about these underlying patterns and rituals, so they knew a bit more about what's actually going on in the classroom. And they worked with experienced teachers. And they had a better formulated research question too. What is the impact of these different types of teachers on learning? And what they thought on beforehand, well, probably the experienced teacher will have a larger impact. They couldn't find a pattern here. They couldn't find a relationship between learning outcomes and if a teacher was trained by a teacher trainee, a trained teacher trainee, or an experienced teacher. That didn't matter. Something else mattered. And that was the type of feedback a teacher gave and his questioning skills. And some novices did this right and they had better results, and some experienced teachers didn't do that good a job on those things and they had lesser outcomes. So experience and training wasn't really the thing, well, at least not the training he had provided. So they went further on this path, and this was a path of what should a teacher do to maximize his outcomes. That was actually the path they were treading down. So they started to work, and that scripting of lessons, that's the hallmark of his research. He kept doing that indefinitely. And I didn't mention this, but he did his research mainly in the higher grades of elementary school or primary education, whatever you call it, and the lower grades in secondary education. Lower grades, junior high we would call it in Canada. And one of the things that helped was that recording and mics and cameras and all that, we got ever more sophisticated. They always followed a small group of students. They didn't do a whole class. They followed 5 or 6 students. That was their model. And they followed them very closely, crept into their skin almost. So what are the things a teacher should do that gives great teaching? They had some results. Feedback was important. We already found that in the second series of studies. Questioning was important. And activating students. I'm not going to do that today. You might have noticed that. I'm telling a story. But if I really want you to remember my stuff, then I should activate you. That's your own responsibility. If stuff is going online, you can order this book, you can do whatever you like, but to remember and use what I'm going to tell you. So they had this first promising results that are so common knowledge to us now, of course, feedback, questioning, activate. It's a 1, 2, 3. And so why didn't they go on? Well, one of the things that they found out after a couple of years of taping what happens in a classroom, that on one hand, it's a ritual that is predictable. On the other hand, it's an enormous complex situation. And this complexity meant that they had to do more than 100, maybe a few hundred follow-up studies to find more than these 3 things. And the outcome would be an endless list of do's and don'ts for teachers. Oh, you're waiting for that, aren't you? Just be on your side of your blackboard, and you get scripted all, not by Nuthall, but by your administrator or your head teacher or your team leader. That's really a life for a teacher. It would lead to a sort of robotification, and right away they knew it's not going to work. The reality of the classroom is too complex to script it all the way down and to turn a teacher into a robot. So after these first great results, they hit a dead end. And then, first he didn't respond, and then went too fast. Then Adrian ultimately came by, an experienced teacher, wanted to do a PhD, and she came with a question: why does a given student answer tests well, or does a test well at one time, another time he'll botch it up? And why can't I predict which student will do a test well? I'm an experienced teacher, but it's every test I do, it's always a surprise what comes out. Who remembered the course matter and who didn't, and who is making my tests good and answering and giving the answers I would want from them, which not. And what actually happened there is that while Graham Nuthall was focusing on the students, he was actually more interested in what the teacher was doing. And he wasn't focusing that much on what was happening within the student's mind and with his learning. So Adrian's question actually really turned the spotlight on the students. That was happened. And what they did is that they disseminated, like a biologist will disseminate a plant or an animal, the course material. A given course on climate on the Antarctic or whatever would have about 20 to 30 different concepts in it. And they would slice that up into a couple of hundred of items, 400 or 500 items. So they looked at the course material, and their question was, which student is going to remember this? Which student is going to answer the question correctly? They set the clock still every 15 seconds. They worked with 3 students. In the end, when in the research that her dissertation was based upon, only 3 students Each student had an observer. An observer noted what every student was doing every 15 seconds. The tape and the camera and everything was stopped every 15 seconds, and all the work these students did was photographed. So it was really something, actually. And they got a result, and Jan published a dissertation. I'm still looking for that. So I don't even know what her outcomes was, but the funny thing is her outcomes weren't that important. Because it was only 3 students, and Nuthall being a very serious scientist, he thought, I need to do replication. That's when the shit hit the fan. He expanded the number of students. He went to 5 or 6, and he went to different courses. I think they did 4 studies with different content. And they got loads of information. I think I already told this. Yeah. But what's really important, and that is the post-test a year later, because that really shows what students remember, what they really have learned. Well, I got a lot of social information about what happens in the classroom. I hope your classrooms are a little bit orderlier than this, but there's a lot of chaos going on, actually. Interesting here is that you could look at a classroom and think of 4 simultaneous processes. The first thing is what's happening in your mind. Right now, what's happening in your mind. I don't know what's happening in Pedro's mind. That's invisible to me, and invisible to the whole environment. But he had these little microphones and cameras, and they were really sensitive. So they picked up the self-talk. Self-talk is really interesting, because that's 90% of the time self-talk is about the stuff the teacher is communicating. So they're repeating the things the teacher is saying. And then there's the social talk, all that stuff, racism, sexism, racism, gossip, planning the social activities for after-school hours and all that. That's hidden for the teacher too. Even, like I told you, every student had someone observing them. They missed 40% of what was on tape. So, imagine what a teacher gets from this social talk and social habit. Nothing. They make you believe, though, that you have contact with them, because they know when to nod. It's one of the rituals. They know when to start murmuring at their book when you're in their vicinity. And zone out the minute you're gone. We did some very nice findings. They even know how to leave the classroom and stay away for 10-15 minutes without being noticed by the teacher. So we found important here is peer opinion. Peer opinion supersedes the teacher's opinion. And that also goes for the course matter. So everything I'm saying right now can be cut down by your neighbor. I was looking for the word. Beheaded by the neighbor, actually. And that peer opinion, they learn a lot from peers, and they also learn a lot of misconceptions from peers. So that's one of the first things that he noticed here. The influence of the teacher also on learning on the course matter is not that big. One of the other things, because of the pre-testing they did, is that they had a very sharp insight into which student knows what about the course matter. On average, 40–50% of your course material is known with the students, but it's like a puzzle. Every student has a different piece of the puzzle. At the end of a given lesson, and the same goes right here, you all came in with different pre-knowledge. So probably everything I'm telling about Nuthall, because we're not dealing with elementary school teachers here, we're dealing with grown-up professionals. Probably everything I'm telling here is known in this group. I'm not telling anything new, but I'm telling something new from maybe each one of you, approximately each one of you. And in a normal classroom situation, they learn more from their peers than from you. So you can't ignore the peer information sharing, you have to use it actually. That's one of the conclusions. And the sharing of knowledge is also the sharing of misconceptions. So everyone learns something else in the same lesson. And while at this point in his research, he also had this eureka about what was the function of those rituals. They allow the teacher to steer the public discourse. They allow the teacher to manage the room. Tom is running a training program in England now, and it's called Running a Room. I like it. So the rituals help us to run our room. That's what they do. At the same time, they prevent us from seeing what's happening with an individual student. We're group focused. Well, that's all about the things that they did find, but what they didn't find was reliable information on students' learn, how students learn. Adrienne's original research question was still unanswered. And this is my reading moment, because I can't tell it as good as Nuthall told it himself.
Could you read it? It's too small to read.
Okay. He was in a study leave, and he said, I did nothing else but analyze that data. I used everything I knew about formal and informal data analysis, producing endless computer printouts and pads full of notes. But gradually it dawned on me that for all the richness of the data we had obtained, the old problem still remained. Adrienne's PhD results did not reappear, and each of the new studies produced what looked like different results. The relationships between teacher and student behaviors, activity structures, resources, and student achievement seemed unique to each study. No replication of any pattern whatsoever. And here he actually took a rather remarkable step, because in my opinion, what most researchers will do when you have this group of N, 5 or 6, and you can't see a pattern, you would scale up. You would scale up, and if you have 100, well, you'll probably see a pattern. He went the opposite way. I don't know why he went the opposite way, maybe because all the types of analysis he did showed him that scaling up wouldn't help here. I suspect it's that. But he scaled down. He went through the research outcomes, their notes, and all the stuff they gathered, and he zoomed in on one student. I don't know if it was John, it's his real name, but it was John. And the topic was immigration into New York. A scripted series of lessons about immigration into New York. And that's when magic happened. Because he could see a relationship between John's test scores and John's classroom experience. A very clear relationship. And then they scaled up again. They did all kinds of replications, and once they knew they were looking for the pattern that emerged from John, repeated itself time and again. It was like almost like a law of nature. So he gave a definition to learning, and I think I'm going to read it up because I want to make very sure that I don't skip it. And it's, a student understands, learns, and remembers a concept if he has encountered all the necessary information 3 times. A concept could be Antarctica is the driest continent, and the items that belong there is it's dry as the Sahara, because the snow doesn't, because of the low temperature, the snow keeps lying around, so we think it snows there a lot, but it really doesn't. And also, I think I forgot the rest. But those things. And if there was a test question about Antarctica, and the student had seen all these items that are related to that test question 3 times, in 80 to 85% of the cases, the student would answer the question correctly. So all you have to do is make sure that your students see the information they need, or hear it, or work with it 3 times. That's the only rule. And we found some more. These 3 times, in the school, when I looked into the way they scripted and structured the lessons, the student had a 4 times chance to encounter all material. Often it would be a video, a teacher talk, work on your own, and group work. That was basically the structure in which the information was passed on. What they found, that's very interesting, is that the sequencing is very important. If one learning experience is exchanged in the order of learning, if the sequence is changed, then the outcomes change. The sequence in which you teach or find students with learning experiences influences the outcomes. It influences what they remember and how they remember it. And what students are doing all the time is trying to understand and make sense of the course material. They're processing it. So that was the Eureka. Now they could predict, because they could record a lesson, they could record the students, and they could like see that, oh, you missed the material twice because you were engaging in social talk. They knew this. And then they would know, well, you're not going to give the right answer on these tests. You were correct in 80 to 85% of the cases. Nobody has ever superseded that, as far as I know. All this is 20 to 15% that they still had wrong. And there are actually two ideas they had about what happened here. The one is a set misconception. And one of the examples I found in his papers is about what are clouds made of. Well, there's a misconception amongst a lot of people that it's damp, it's gas. And it's actually little drops of water. And they will even attribute that misconception to the teacher. Jan Tishauser told it was it was damp a year later. So that they might know it in the short term and the immediate test, but a year later, the post-test, it's gone. And the misconception has taken over. The other thing that might influence that 80 to 85% predictability is that they missed something while recording. Maybe I thought you were paying attention 3 times, but actually it was only 2 times. So that's the funny thing is. The funny thing here is that the predictive value of intelligence or ability wasn't there. Intelligence or ability did not predict which student would answer a given test question correctly. So that was his latest conundrum that he had to solve. He looked at that in his last research period, and that's the reason why I deeply regret that Daniel Muis is down with the flu, because he was going to tell us about metacognition and what we can do with metacognition. Metacognition seems to be the answer here. The better students, the more able students, know how to get more out of the lessons out of school. They have better metacognitive skills. So they simply make sure that they pay attention 3 times. Or if the social structure is so important that they miss that, then they go back to the material at home, for instance. They had more prior knowledge. And we know that from cognitive science, that with prior knowledge and knowledge builds on knowledge, that was a difference with more able. So it's more prior knowledge, and they were far more effective with getting their information from the lessons. Yeah, because of all the standard testing he used, he had another catch, and that was that standardized tests are virtually worthless in his eyes. He discovered that the first thing that you test is the motivation of a student to do well on the test. Then you test something about his SES, we would say, his cultural backgrounds. And maybe you test something about what he has actually learned. The interviews you had a year later were just as valuable and actually, I think, reading between the lines, more trustworthy than the real test they were doing. As I stated here, knowledge comes last. It's about the last thing that you measure on a test. It's a bit awkward for education researchers because we really need those tests to draw any kind of conclusion. He needed them too. Okay, what does it all sum up to? Well, rehearsal is the key, and that's what is key finding. Make sure that the children rehearse the matter, do that in a variety of manners. Try to follow what's happening in your classroom, what's happening in the minds of children. I think he laid the groundwork for formative evaluation, or AFL, as it's called in the UK, Assessment for Learning. I don't know if you know that term. One of the other things is because it takes time and effort to really get a grasp of the course material, is he says keep it small. School children in the big questions within the different subjects, and don't expand too much. And know that peer context. Know who's bullying. Knows who is having a romantic affair with one another. Know this stuff that goes on in your classrooms. And again, metacognition. We're going to put Daniel Muis's sheets online so you can see something about. And it's quite up to date. Some of the research he's building on has to be published yet, so that's quite up to date. We're going to put it online to our ResearchEd website, so look into metacognition. It's the next big thing in education, actually, because it really does make a difference. Some sources for you. I'm going to put this online, and I have everything I said was scripted. I'm not sure how much I kept to my script, but I'm going to put my script online too, in Dutch and in English. So you can look at back. Any questions or Adrie?
The one that last slide, can you put that one? That one. The first one says repetition invariance. Repetition of what?
Of the course matter. Of the stuff you want to learn.
Isn't that a bit in contrast then with the last one, where it says, no, you don't have to learn students the content, but metacognition?
Well, I think it's in line with his last bit of research, because the repetition factor works for every student, but not every student gets the same fruit from education. And the difference is in that metacognition. So if you want more students to have higher test scores, learn more, let's put it in a more friendly way. learn more, then you need to teach the students metacognition. And some have it. Maybe they learn it at home, maybe they learn it from another teacher somewhere, maybe it's an inborn ability with some students, but it's the students that don't have it that need it the most, and they need these tools from the teacher.
And where does teacher quality come? Is that with the variance, the repertoire of ways in which a teacher can expose the student to curriculum material? Because I don't hear much about the quality of the teaching.
No, that's he actually left that path, because he started out with, and he did that on purpose. He started out as a young student in recording what happens in the classroom with experienced teachers, and he had this assumption: the experienced teacher is a good teacher, so I want to see good teaching. I need to go to that teacher. But his research.
So poor teachers don't do this.
Probably. Yeah. But his research pivoted away from the teacher and focused solely on learning, on the course material and the student. And the teacher, in his view, and this is my conclusion, I have to be careful here, and we can't ask him anymore, is a facilitator of learning.
Yeah, but we also know that some are more effective than others.
Yeah, I agree with that. In his earlier research, he did see some things. The teacher with high results, they gave a different kind of feedback. They had better questioning skills, and was the other one, they activated the students more. Yeah, that was. But he stopped there because he saw it as a dead end. Time. One more question.
Yeah, a question about retention. You sort of mentioned it briefly. So, you know, the students, they saw these things, 3 things, they then took a test, and then did he do any research into a year later? Did they still know it?
Yeah, a year later, post-testing a year later, and an interview a year later. And the interview was about the questions they had wrong. So
yeah.
Where did this conception come from? Because they were very interested in where did it go. But the retention rate was quite high.
Okay.
And what he states is students will remember the items of the concept if they have seen all the items belonging to the concept 3 times. And that remember is based on the post-test a year later.
Okay.
Yeah. But that's quite reassuring, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I still have time because I misinterpreted the 5 fingers. It's not stop, it's 5 minutes.
Yeah. Well, I was wondering, do you know anything that's happened with this in maybe in the Netherlands, or how they will proceed or something? Because I know he is gone, but his research is not gone. Did somebody went further with it? And the other one was about knowing the peer context. I think in Rotterdam there's somebody, Ilias Al-Hadoui, he's talking about transformative schools. And he's really about peers and about the social relations in the schools.
Yeah,
researching that.
Yeah, well, one of the things that surfaced in his research is the enormous influence of peer communication on learning. So not only on going out and having fun, or who's being bullied or not, or whatever. No, there's enormous influence on learning. What's happening with this research? Well, there's the Nuthall Trust.org in New Zealand, and that's run, I think, by his daughter, and there's some money of the New Zealand government in there. It's not very lively, but what is still there, and I hope the earthquakes don't endanger too much, but all the trust has all this data. So it's possible to reanalyze and look back at this data. As far as I know, there are some researchers that get grants from the trust and do something with it, but it's not big scale. actually we have a very large treasure there in New Zealand, and not enough is being done to it, or with it, actually. And I know of no research that works in the way has been working. Nobody has done it since Nuthall. And his outcomes are very stable and very worthwhile. So.
You mentioned 4 possibilities to present to students: the teacher talk, video group, and individual work. And then you said sequencing is important. Is it just important you do all 4, or is there something you do first and then second?
Well, what I know from the scripted lessons is that the video came first, the teacher talk came second, the individual assignments came last. I'm instructing now, and the group assignments came in between.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, but what they saw with individual students is that for whatever reason the sequencing was different and the outcomes of the tests were different. The items. Any more? Thank you, thank you. I hate standing here or sitting here. Okay.